John Fund, sitting in for Steve Malzberg here at Newsmax TV. We have a very special guest. Frankly, it's almost become a cliche to say someone is legendary, but Roger Stone is legendary. He has been a political consultant, a provocateur, a political analyst for, well, since the days of Richard Nixon. Is that right, Roger?
Absolutely. I'm a Nixonite at heart.
Well, Nixon certainly had brought you some great stories, which I've heard with relish. We have a lot to talk about on national politics and also New York City politics because we have a primary here coming up. What's on your radar screen right now? How do you see the national political situation?
I tell you, I'm much more riveted on this New York City mayor's race. It's really
talk about that.
Finally starting to get interesting. I mean, what you've seen here, and I think most people realize, in the Democratic primary, if no one achieves 40%, which is unlikely, then there's a runoff between the two top vote getters. It looked just a couple weeks ago like that would be a squabble between City Council President Christine Quinn, former City Controller Bill Thompson, and Anthony Weiner, the former congressman. With the new revelations, Anthony Weiner has dropped to the basement. He's at 10% and falling. And suddenly, Bill de Blasio, a true leftist, I mean, the most far-out liberal you can imagine.
He used to work with the Working Families Party, which was allied with Acorn, the infamous voter registration fraud group.
It's an amazing thing. While he was on the city council, he was also a paid lobbyist for the Working Families Party to lobby the city council. I kid you not.
You can do that? Wow.
Well, you're not supposed to, but he did it. I wrote a long piece on it at the time. Additionally, by the way, he's called for doing away with the so-called member items, which is a slush fund in which city council members have the opportunity to get millions of dollars for these nonprofit organizations in their districts. Since he was on the city council, he got about $7 million in member items, and those organizations, their employees and board members, kick back in campaign contributions to him over $109,000, what they call, I think in New Jersey, it's called pay for play. So he's not exactly a reformer, if you know what I mean.
Well, that's the way you build a political machine these days, isn't it?
It's going to be very interesting. The other piece of interesting good news out of the Quinnipiac poll today is that former Deputy Mayor Joe Lhota, leading John Catsimatidis, the eccentric left-wing billionaire, close friend of Bill and Hillary, major supporter of Eliot Spitzer, David Patterson, Eric Schneiderman, Barack Obama, who now calls himself, oddly enough, a Republican. If you ended up here conceivably with a de Blasio-Lhota race in the general election, you could elect another Republican mayor of New York City.
Because the contrast between the deputy mayor to Rudy Giuliani and Bill de Blasio, the former guy who hung around with Working Families Party and Acorn, would be so dramatic?
Well, I think that's part of it. Also, Joe Lhota is an adult. He's somebody who's actually managed something successfully, who understands how New York City works, understands that raising taxes is a way to drive jobs out of the city, who understands that the keys to economic growth are spending restraint and tax restraint, as opposed to de Blasio, who wants to, quote unquote, tax the rich, lay on a new tax across the board to pay for pre-K education, and so on. I think it would be a stunning contrast, and I think a lot of moderates, a lot of the people in the middle, would gravitate to Lhota. Lhota is not a carbon copy of Rudy. He has some of Rudy's stronger attributes, but he is, I think, socially somewhat more moderate, and therefore, I think, probably more electable in a city in which the Republican Party has shrunk to 19% of registration.
Well, over half of New Yorkers take the subway or public transportation, and Joe Lhota, when he was head of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, really improved the subway. I mean, it's not a day at the beach to take it, but it's clean, it's relatively reliable, crime is way down on the subway. That in a microcosm is what Rudy Giuliani helped perform miracles with in New York City, because New York City's now had 8 years of Giuliani, 12 years of Bloomberg, who in many respects carried on Giuliani policies, and Lhota could actually make a plausible argument, I made transit work, I can make the city work.
I think that he needs a contrast. The Democratic primary holds the key. If for example, Christine Quinn, the city council president, is successful in winning the nomination, I think Lota is a strong challenge. If de Blasio, who is virtually a communist, he's so far out there, I think he's for redistribution of wealth. If he wins the primary, I think Lota is viable. Against Bill Thompson, the former city controller, I think it's a much tougher race because Thompson, I think, can command the base of the Democratic Party, mostly minorities, fairly easily. On the other hand, his candidacy in the primary seems to be fizzling. This could be tied to the fact that his top strategist, Hank Henry Scheinkoff, recently took the Fifth Amendment multiple times in a state corruption probe having to do with contracts at the Aqueduct racetrack. So with corruption very much in the minds of New York voters because of this parade of politicians, Malcolm Smith, Seminario, Elliot Spitzer, so on and so forth, just a parade of corruption out of Albany, I think that's a very big negative for Thompson going into this primary.
Now, there are a couple of other, now you said Anthony Weiner, of course, has been forced down to 10%, but the other Democratic candidate running for citywide office in New York City is Elliot Spitzer. He seems to be soaring. How is that happening with Weiner collapsing and Spitzer doing so well?
Well, he's dipped into his own pockets. He refuses to participate in the city campaign finance program, and therefore $2 million, John Fund, I could elect you with $2 million.
Oh, yeah, that may be tough.
He's drowning his opponents in money. Very interesting story broke this afternoon about 4 black men who were fired from their positions as doormen at a building owned by Bernard Spitzer simply for being black. They took their case to the Bronx Supreme Court where they won. Their decision was appealed. It's a classic case of race discrimination. They appealed directly to Elliot Spitzer for justice, and he brushed them off. Now he's running 30 points ahead among black voters. I wonder how that will look when more and more African Americans learn about his
for that we'll have to have his opponent, Mr. Springer, have enough money for ads. Well, Roger, thank you so much for your participation here. I know that you spend a lot of time in New York. Are you going to be up here for the primary?
I will be up there soon. I would just say, as far as the picture goes, it's not over till it's over.
I'd love to have a drink with you.
Let's do it.
Roger Stone, Republican consultant and raconteur.